already spent the money.
You've already spent the money.
Yeah. I'm in debt. I need this to take off.
Well, it's Podrzebie, the comic book nerdcast that dares to ask, what? Me worry? I'm your idiot, Kyle Bridget, and with me your co-idiot,
Paddy McInerney. Again, though, why co-idiot?
Well, I mean, it's just, I think I would remember if, you were co-idiot last week. So, okay. We just switch it up,
Okay, sweet. All right, you know what? Let's fix it in post. Moving on. Let's move on to the It's Rambling Men department.
I got something on my mind.
Yes, sir.
Now, you see, when I was like 9, 10, up to about 13, I had a lot of access to cinematic full frontal nudity. I lived in a small town where we didn't have much culture, but we did have was 3 video rental stores: Video Scan, Video Terminal, and Backdraft Video, which ironically burnt down.
Was that before or after the release of the film?
Oh, after. I wouldn't have known it was ironic if not for the film. And my mother, God love her, had put a note on our account at all the video rental stores that I, a 9-year-old boy, could rent R-rated movies.
Yes.
Which made sense because she was going to rent them for me anyway. So, why she got to bother coming down,
Yes, absolutely.
Like, it's just a formality at that point. And so between me and my buddy, because basically we'd have sleepovers every weekend and rent movies, we had rented literally every horror movie in town. But also we'd rent comedies and sci-fi, action, all sorts of things. And, on top of that, Canadian network TV actually shows nudity. So on like City TV, which we got out of Toronto, they had these late night, what they call blue movies.
Tonight, Baby Blue 2 on City TV, featuring fun-loving adults in life-affirming situations.
Oh, I know what blue is. What the listeners can't recognize right now is my prudish disgust with your Canadian culture. I was shaking my head back and forth at this news. Nudity on network television.
Oh, yeah. Now, I mean, you don't generally see it in prime time or whatever. It's late at night. So just a side note, City TV, they had a little video booth set up on the corner of their building, and it was called Speaker's Corner.
Speak and be seen on Speaker's Corner.
And you could just sit down there in front of a camera, press a button, and just say whatever you wanted, or do whatever you wanted, or show whatever you wanted. Yeah. And there was a show, Speaker's Corner. They'd show some pretty crazy stuff on there too, but I think they blurred out the nudity, except when toplessness for women became legal in Ontario. And I remember that particular episode was, especially illuminating.
Yeah. So it's kind of, this is a network show, though. It's not like public access, because that sounds like the type of thing that would be on public access television.
No, it was like a network, City TV. They're probably part of like Rogers or some bigger corporation here. But it was a full channel. They had different kinds of programming. They made their own shows, but they also had other shows like reruns of The Simpsons and stuff. But that was one of their things. And it was just part of the building. You could go to Speaker's Corner. Maybe it's even still there. I don't know. For a while, they had them in different towns even.
Yeah, that's really interesting to me that they would do that. I mean, certainly they would like edit them to an extent, right? They curate and like pull out ones that would be interesting or thought-provoking or amusing.
It wasn't as interesting as you would think.
Yeah.
Because there was a lot of like duds on there, because I bet you 99% of them were just like, hi, I'm from Detroit and it's so nice to be in Canada. You're all so nice. I like your coins.
All right, I'm going to go home and get shot. Bye.
Yeah. But every now and again there'd be like regular performers who would come down and play music or tell jokes or do little bits and stuff, or just like eccentric people with weird animals and stuff. But I got to imagine when they're like going around the clock, like you're not getting that much of that gold. Oh,
somebody has to watch all that too. All right.
Yeah.
I got you off on a tangent.
Sorry, that's easy to do. And then I also had cable. So, I was a big fan of this thing called the Drambuie Showcase Review.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Drambuie Showcase Review.
which was on the channel Showcase. And every night they'd just show erotic art house films. You know, as close as you could get to hardcore, they would just show that on TV, which, you know, I would watch and tape on my TV and VCR in my bedroom.
Yeah.
So I was seeing a lot of nudity. So by the mid 90s, I had been exposed to a lifetime worth of like lowbrow exploitation films, trash cinema, and a fair amount of like softcore art films, mostly from the 70s and 80s. Which means, you know, I encountered a ton of TNA, quite a bit of bush, and, you know, occasionally someone would hang dong. You know, that was kind of like the state of nudity that was available cinematically.
Yeah.
And I wasn't really interested in new media at the time, you know, unless something was animated or sci-fi fantasy or like somehow outside of the real world. If it wasn't something outrageous, I just didn't get the point. But, you know, my friends understood that, you know, I was this like reactionary curmudgeon. And so they just ignored my complaints that what they were watching in the 90s was just like watered down versions of like horror and sex comedies and all that thing. So, you know, they enjoyed like I Know What You Did Last Summer and Scream. And it just seemed so milquetoast to me.
Those are like horror classics, right? Like Scream overtook franchises like Halloween, right? As it's something that gets revisited. There have been oodles of sequels to those. I mean, it certainly isn't like Sleepaway Camp.
No, it's not. You're right. It's nowhere near as good as Sleepaway Camp, which is, you know, fantastic. It was just like, it was so watered down. You know, even like sex comedies like American Pie, which was sort of marketed as the ultimate teen sex comedy, and, you know, to its credit, had some tits.
Oh, yeah.
It was nowhere near as provocative as like Porky's or like Revenge of the Nerds or something like that, you know?
Yeah. But hold on, like the provocation from those comes from, like, I don't want to throw this term around, but like borderline rape.
Well, but I mean that's all in American Pie as well, right? You could view American Pie through that sort of like rape culture lens just as easy. But, you know, there certainly wasn't full frontal nudity in them or copious amounts of it.
Okay, yeah.
So in terms of like what it would sort of show you explicitly, it was much more tame.
I have a question. So like on the scale of something like Porky's to American Pie, on that spectrum, where does something like Animal House fall?
I can't recall. I don't think Animal House actually does have that much nudity in it. I think it probably has some.
It does have some, and it's burned into my mind.
I don't particularly remember that one as being as full of nudity as like Revenge of the Nerds or
yeah.
I don't know. I'm a loss for titles here. There's so many. I'm just trying to think of ones that aren't like, you know, like Six Swedes in the Alps or something, you know, where it was like European movies sort of like brought over here, European sex comedies. And then I had this one friend, he was really into this movie called Wild Things, which was this sexy thriller mystery. And it was marketed entirely on the babes, right? Like this was, like the babes were front and center.
Ooh, but Bacon.
He dropped trow, right? Like,
oh yeah,
he drops trow in that movie and he shows his dick, which is pretty rare actually in movies. Like in terms of nudity, you know, you see lots of TNA, you know, a bit of bush. Very rarely would you see a penis. You know, it was kind of like much more taboo.
Yeah, I think that scene alone of Kevin Bacon, like I understood why people are like, you know, these images of women cause girls to have like an unrealistic body expectations. Just seeing Kevin Bacon's dong gave me body dysmorphia, like instantaneously.
Yeah, I think he's got a good one from what I recall. But the girls, I don't even think they're topless in the movie. Like it's very minimal nudity. And I think this sort of marked a shift in modern cinema, or at least Western cinema. Basically, like after the early 90s, you get less female nudity overall, especially bush, and slightly more male frontal nudity. This kind of prudish shift, you know, carried on through the torture porn genre, Saw.
Yeah, Hostel.
Yeah, it's Hostel, that kind of thing, which that brought kind of the gore and sadism back. But, you know, the nudity was still pretty minimal in most of those movies. And, you know, it was nothing like the Nazi exploitation films of the 70s that you would see, which were explicitly torturous, you know?
So I was about to bring up, yeah, do you like long for a day when Elsa, She-Wolf of the SS, is going to reemerge?
Yes, Ilsa, you promised me.
What did you call me?
Ilsa. I mean, Commandant, Fraulein Doctor.
Better. Much better.
Well, I don't know. I think that it's good that that film exists in that it's very interesting that
Yeah.
that sort of like moment in time existed, and that sort of, because people were sort of exploring these sort of like edges of taboo in film at that point. And so you have something like Sallow, 120 Days of Sodom. It's like that, I would say, is actually a really good film in a lot of ways. Like it's kind of an important film, almost like a form of literature or something. It's like a higher level. But then you've got like Salon Kitty and Ilsa She-Wolf of the SS, and what else is there? Hitler's Last Train, Gestapo's Last Orgy, Red Knights of the Gestapo, Natalie Escaped from Hell, The Beast in Heat, the Nazi Love Camp 7, Nazi Love Camp 27, Deported Women of the SS Special Section.
Hold on.
I think there's some other ones in there.
What was that? The Love Camp? I love how it's somewhat reminiscent of Love Potion number 9. What was it? Love Camp number 27?
I don't really understand those films. They were just called Nazi Love Camp. I think they had like different titles. Like some of those movies might have been the same movie with different names.
Yeah.
But they did I know there's 7 and then there's 27. I don't know if there's like 1 to 6 and then 8 to 26. I think the numbers aren't like sequential.
Yeah.
But it's like those movies, those were all about torture. But they were also about the nudity. It was a very different sort of, ethos. And, I think following that sort of like change was sort of part of the 9/11 ethos, like popular depictions of torture shifted from being, like a Viet Cong soldier making a bunch of like POWs, like play Russian roulette or something. It's like that. Those were like the popular scenes of torture that you would see like when I was a kid. And then that sort of shifted into like the square-jawed, pragmatic American hero just doing what needs to be done.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you have stuff like John Ashcroft. When he was the Attorney General, he wanted to drape the Statue of Justice because she had an exposed breast.
Yeah, I remember that.
And that breast, coincidentally, symbolizes liberty and like the Republic. So,
Yeah. Wait, isn't that that's more of like a French symbol, right? Isn't there what's that painting of that woman carrying the French flag and her bosom is out?
I could have told you the name of that until you asked me. Now that you've asked me, I'll never be able to remember it. But I mean, American iconography borrows a lot, from the French Revolution.
Yeah, absolutely.
Anyway, by like early 2000s or whatever, and continuing to now, heroic scenes of graphic torture, good, bush hair, bad.
Mm-hmm.
And cinematic nudity has been in a steady decline since. So, and I've got some data here, because this was something I kind of felt was just true. And I wanted to make sure that like there was some data to back it up. So I went on IMDb. So, I guess take it with a grain of salt.
That must be like the best source for gathering data on this. I mean,
I think it gives us a picture of what I'm talking about. It's not academic. You couldn't take this and write a study on it, but I think it probably does reveal something in what I've done. So here's my methodology. I search for feature films by decade, beginning with the 70s, right up to this year. First, I just looked up the number of films overall, and then I looked up feature films with the keyword female full frontal nudity.
all right.
And with the keyword male frontal nudity. So, and here's what I found. So starting in the 1970s, from 1970 to 1979, IMDb shows 36,873 feature films. Now, of those 36,800 and some odd films, 1,378 featured female full frontal nudity, and 536 featured male frontal nudity.
Mm-hmm.
So I did the math. Of feature films,
Mm-hmm.
4% of them in the 1970s featured female full frontal nudity, and 1.4% featured male frontal nudity.
That checks out.
And, it kind of backs up what I felt, that you see more female full frontal nudity than male frontal nudity. It's not just my viewer bias. It's a thing.
Yeah.
Then in 1980s, you have 39,933 feature films made. So just shy of 40,000 films. So there's more films. There's less nudity. So in terms of female full frontal nudity, there's 1,217 films with full frontal nudity of females and 564 for the men. So that's in the 1980s, 3% now of films featured female full frontal nudity and 1.4% featured male. So it pretty much held steady for the men, dropped a full percent for the women. And then I'm just going to round up these numbers to make them a little bit easier to say. So in the 90s, there was about 44,000 films made, 1,050 featured female full frontal nudity, 653 featured male full frontal nudity. So there's a decline in the overall number of films each decade of female frontal nudity so far, and an increase of male full frontal nudity. So women are down around 2.4% of films, and men are up to 1.5% of films in the 90s. Then in the 2000s, there are 74,700 films made. So like almost double the amount of films that are made, which has to be due to digital film.
Wait, in what decade is that? 2000s?
2000 to 2009. Probably also more countries making films too that are released and listed on IMDb.
Yeah. Also DVD market. I mean, there was the VHS market was pretty big, but I think that DVDs were cheaper to produce. So probably in the later half of that decade, you had a larger amount being produced and sold digitally or onto CD.
Yeah, so there's a lot of factors. So I think the numbers, once you get to the 2000s, are maybe like a little bit less reliable, just because there's way more movies. There's probably way fewer movies where people are actually entering keywords as a percentage of the movies. But anyway, you have 1,230 films featuring female full frontal nudity. So that's more overall, but it's significantly less as a percentage. And for the men, it's 1,144 films. So it's a significant increase, and it's a slight increase as a percentage. So women go down to 1.6% of films in the 2000s, in like 2000 to 2009, and the men go up to 1.53% of films being made. And then from 2010 to 2019, it's even a bigger increase. So now there's 162,000 films being made in that decade, which is like more than double. There's more nudity again. So there's 1,737 female full frontal nudity films and 1,684 male. So that's 1.07% of films in the like 2010 2019 have female full frontal nudity, and 1.03 have male frontal nudity. So they're only like 0.04% away from each other at this point, whereas it started they were like 3% away.
Yeah, here's some feedback. This is a peer review process. I think what you need to do really is go back through all of this data and then set budgets for the films. Because I wonder if, I mean, like you go with feature length film, and in the 70s that sets the bar. There's a barrier to entry, right? But then in the 2000s and certainly the 2010s, that barrier to entry gets lowered significantly. So what's getting called a feature film and what is being included on IMDb, it's like shit.
I agree that the numbers, especially I think from about 2000 on when there's that big jump, I think the numbers are much less clear and able to be deciphered in a way that's like not haphazard. Like I think it's harder to glean good data during the 2000 to now, just because of the number of films that there are. But also in the 70s, like there were probably more shoestring budget films being produced, because IMDb is listing pornos, like especially in the 70s, like Deep Throat's on there, Behind the Green Door would be on there, so I just want to mention why I started in the 70s, and that's because in the 30s the Hollywood studios implemented the Hays Code, which is also known as the Production Code. It was basically like the Comics Code Authority, but like 20 or 30 years earlier, and it was for movies. And it imposed a sort of strict moral guidelines for what you could show in films. And like the Comics Code Authority, it gets chipped away at bit by bit over the decades. And so first you get these kind of like early exploitation films that would use like the pretense of education to slip nudity in. So you get things like Mom and Dad in 1945, which is like, warning about the dangers of teenage sex. And they show like graphic depictions of venereal diseases, and they show a live birth.
To what end?
to what end that people went to see it. It was like the third highest grossing film of the year by some accounts. And it's because there was just such a taboo and there was such a restriction that people were just starved for like anything that kind of like referenced sex or talked about sex. So it's like you just have to go. And it would kind of like travel around like at that time. It's like it was like a traveling kind of show. That's why it's kind of hard to tell for sure exactly how much money it made, because it wasn't like through the studio system. So, that's kind of how you got away with it, with these sort of like educational films. So things like Marijuana, spelled with an H, or Sex Madness, Child Bride, and there's sort of like these sort of rakes progress stories, like Reefer Madness or whatever, where it's like, you watch the downfall of a young person into the underground world of lurid sex, drugs, and alcohol, ostensibly as a warning, but, really just because people want to see this stuff depicted.
Yeah.
Then in the 50s, you get this wave of nudist films, because nudism is not a perversion, it's a lifestyle. So you were allowed to show nudity and nudism, as long as there was like a strategically placed beach ball over the groin area. You could have TNA.
I just want to go on record. Nudism is a perversion.
I disagree. You've never been to a nude beach?
No way, man.
Oh man, it's the best. I love it. It's totally cool, like it's
Wait
not,
a second. Hey, I want you stand up real quick. Are you wearing pants right now?
Look, I'm not going to stand up. But it's not because I'm not wearing pants. It's because I'm wearing pajama pants. And I don't want you to know.
All right.
So, there's all these nudist films where it's like this bumbling guy, like a comedian with a guitar or something, and he kind of like falls into like a nudist colony where he meets a bunch of these sort of like glorious Amazon nudist women and kind of learns like how great the nudist lifestyle is. So there's a whole like series of films like this. There's Diary of a Nudist, Blaze Star Goes Nudist, My Bear Lady.
Stop it.
That's one of them. So there's a whole bunch. I think I might have that one. Maybe I'll send it to you. Then as the 60s go on, the nudist film story structure gets adapted into these films called the nudie cuties, where like the pretense of nudism is dropped. It's the same sort of thing. Like a bumbling guy bumps into a whole bunch of naked women, basically. Just TNA, but there's a whole bunch of them, like Nude on the Moon, The Adventures of Lucky Pierre, or Orgy of the Dead, which is Ed Wood wrote that one. And Russ Meyer, he's like the biggest name to come out of this sort of genre. And then that leads into the Roughies, which are like similar in terms of the amount of nudity, but they're more like film noir, and they have like violence and crime and lesbianism and white slavery and sex cults and stuff like that. And these would play in the early grindhouse theaters. And sort of while this progression of cinematic nudity is going on, the MPAA is basically struggling to remain relevant until it eventually abandons the code completely in favor of their rating system in 1967, which is more or less continues today. That's the one that you see, G, PG, R, X. There's some other ones. And that lifted the restrictions of screening this stuff. And so that's where you get to this interesting intersection of regular porn and cinema. So you have like the Black Emmanuel films. Some of those have hardcore scenes, but most of them do not. Or at least they have cuts where they do not. Maybe in different markets they do. So you have this sort of thing. You have like Deep Throat becomes this big like cultural moment. And people rush out to see it, with their wives or whatever.
Caligula,
for sure. That's a film I think that also had some hardcore scenes as well that aren't like.
I think that story isn't as straightforward though. I think there was some
shot after. Well, there's also Caligula 2, which I believe is a porno. And then there's like Caligula and Messalina. And then I think there's also Caligula's Love Slaves. I think that's another one too. There's a few Caligula films.
I'm a Caligula purist, so.
Are you just like Caligula?
Just the first one.
So in the 1970s, full frontal nudity was still fairly novel. So I think a loss of novelty is one reason that you sort of see a decline in nudity sort of steadily over the years, is that it's not as interesting, I guess, because, we've all seen it. And another is just capitalism, right? Like, the fewer audiences you can pitch your film to, the less potential revenue you can make. And then this is especially true with like opening up international markets that are actually becoming dominant. And so you get this sort of phenomenon of like the desexed Marvel film, things like that. And I also think there's a psychological component as well, especially in like America. Like there's a fear of sexuality tied to various moral panics that are going on, which we see played out in things like banning mouse or, the anti-drag queen laws, or most recently the Michelangelo statue of David. There's some outrage over that recently.
Because his wiener's too small.
Well, he's scared, right? you wouldn't be showing, if you were going up against Goliath. And but that was like literally a joke 30 years ago on The Simpsons.
Is it a masterpiece or just some guy with his pants down?
Now it's like reality. And then you see sort of the same thing in the more censorious corners of the left, where you have debates about like displays of sexuality at pride parades, or the anti-porn rhetoric, or like, even like in recent months, there's been like these sort of inexplicable defenses of the Hays Code and the Comics Code Authority and stuff like that, where people are sort of coming around saying like, well, it was pretty nice. Not every movie was full of sex, which is like overlooks like how awful those systems were and like how oppressive they were.
What's funny is I think at a recent show I said, I think I said something in defense of the Comics Code Authority.
Well, I have no respect for the Comics Code Authority, but I do agree that comics were like advertising to kids in the most gratuitous and offensive ways. And, that probably should have been reined in some way. But like, I think the code was like, that was like social engineering, like it was really messed up, especially some of the stuff you couldn't show, like you had to have respect for cops and all sorts of stuff. And the same thing with the Hays Code, right? Like that's where it's like all of a sudden every movie couple sleeps in 2 separate beds. So anyway, here's how I feel about it. I'm a bit of a reactionary on this issue, and I'd like to see us as a society back up around the 3% mark in terms of nudity. And when it comes to the narrowing of the bush to dong gap,
BTD,
I'm all for it. I'm a feminist. Free the peen. I can get behind that. I just want to see more nudity in cinema overall, of all stripes, and I think there's room for more sex in cinema. What are your thoughts?
I think it's fine how it is right now.
It's getting worse. It's a slippery slope.
Well, this is the other thought that I had, is that, you have shows on HBO, right, that rely, I shouldn't say rely because they're like really well received critically. There's no reliance on nudity, but that's something where it's like almost every HBO show has some form of nudity in it, right? And a lot of those like kind of high-end television series, like that seems to be how they mark themselves as being
prestige.
Yeah, a prestige thing where it's like, yes, we show the human form,
the naughty bits. Yeah, it's a distinction from network television or whatever.
Yeah,
and I agree. And I think TV, I'm sure you could do this search for TV and you would definitely find like a massive uptick in nudity on TV. I recently watched Game of Thrones. I had never seen it.
I've never seen it.
I was surprised at how much gratuitous nudity was in it. Like every episode. I think there's a different sort of story there. TV and cinema have kind of merged, right? Because now when you go to the movies, it's all digital. And so it's the same picture that you get on your TV at home. It's not film, right? And so like TV has become like film, or TVs have become huge and high def. The programming has become more cinematic in terms of nudity.
Budgets are a lot higher.
Well, that's it, yeah. And I guess in that market, it's like nudity draws them in. But the cinema, it doesn't work. I don't know. But I miss it. I like to see a little more. Not a ton more, but, I feel like the downward trend is like, I find it somewhat alarming. I feel like there's like a desexing of like popular media. And, sex and nudity, it's like that's a big part of life,
Yeah.
Like, you might not know this about me, but under my clothes, I'm naked right now.
Ew.
I know. It's a lifestyle, bro. Well, here we are at the Wordly Desires department.
And we have each picked 5 publications that we could create if money, time, reality was no object. What would we assemble into books, periodicals, or some type of medium that could be published and distributed out to people like us?
And even better, if someone else made it, so we could just read it and not have to do any of the work.
Yeah, I don't know why I roped us into it.
Yeah, I was worried for a second there. I was like, oh man, we're already doing a podcast? Like, geez, what do you want from me?
I could barely do this.
Hey, we're almost up to episode 2.
All right.
So we came up with rules for this. So these are books that we wish existed, no matter the cost. It could be a regular book, a comic book, a series of comics, a magazine, whatever, a publication. To the best of our knowledge, these have to be books or series that don't already exist, or at least that are extremely obscure, like they're self-published, or it was like a small run done years ago, or it's in a different language. 3, it has to be theoretically possible. So you could say Kit Lively and Dave DeGrand do a Batman run, but you couldn't say Dave Berg does a Batman run because he's dead. Rule number 4 is no smoking.
What?
Yeah. Yeah, it's just not healthy, and it probably messes with the equipment.
All right. So, well, let's kick it off with number 5.
So, my pick for number 5, I'd like to see a series of Cracked magazine archives. So, like, you could do the best of Ward, the best of Severin, the best of Davis, the best of Orheck, the best of Close. You could do collections of Nanny Dickering interviews, or their comic book parodies, or, Ditko's robots. There's all kinds of things that you could do with that. And it doesn't exist. There's like basically no Cracked books put out except for like...
Mort Todd did too.
He did too. He reprinted the best of Severin and the best of Davis. But those were just issues of Cracked that he reprinted from the actual issues. God love him. I have those books. They're better than nothing. But, it really does hurt the artwork when you have to take it from the printed version. There's already like some degradation. It's a copy of a copy.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. It is. Those ones are lacking. So in your mind, this is like taking the original artwork, right? Like,
well, that's
printing
the problem. And that's why this will probably never happen, because Cracked was in the American media building in 2001 when the anthrax scare happened, just after 9/11. And so someone anonymously mailed a letter containing anthrax, and someone died. And as a result of the evacuation, all of Crack's photographic prints of the originals were destroyed due to contamination. So they don't exist. Unless there's like copies somewhere. You can find the issues and you can scan the pages from that, but it doesn't exist. Like, there'll never be like an artist edition or anything. Maybe you can track down some originals or something, but
Yeah.
But I think it's like there could be AI scanning technology where they can kind of like maybe eventually do resizing of zipatone and like different kinds of like halftones.
Yeah.
But that's my number 5 that I'd like to see, is some really high quality Cracked books.
I like that. And I feel somewhat ashamed. Cracked never even entered my mind.
Wow. It shows a lot about who you are as a person.
And my number 5 would be a collection of Tintin.
Okay, come on.
Yeah. Yeah.
I got one on my shelf right now.
Yeah, and it sucks. All right, let me tell you.
Yeah, it's not very good.
It's one of two things. It's either there was like this slipcase collection of 23 issues. Now, those Tintin heads will be like, wait, it's 24, right? Tintin in the Congo.
Oh, that hasn't been reprinted. I can imagine why.
They've stopped reprinting it.
So is that the only one you want? Or you have the rest, you just need that one?
Yeah. My ideal Tintin collection is 24 issues of Tintin in the Congo.
How would they be printed? Would it be like
back to front? Yeah, anyway. But yeah, so that's your option. You have like the slip jacketed ones where they're like the soft back ones you can just buy at Barnes and Noble or whatever goofball Canadian book distributor you guys have. Like,
it's called Chapters here.
Chapters, okay.
Yeah,
I would call it books. That's what...
It's called a boot books.
They have these again, they have hardcover ones that are in a nice slipcase. They had two versions, one with all 24 issues, the other with 23, but they're smaller. To me, that like you lose something.
And then probably recolored as well.
I think they're relettered too. So what I would ask is that you look at something like the Calvin and Hobbes Essential Collection. I bought that for my daughter for Christmas. It's 3 hardbound volumes, fabric covered in this beautiful case. You take them out. You do that with those. You have to do like 8 issues in each one. It'd be huge. You'd need a book stand to read it. But oh, I want it so badly.
I was in Paris 10, 11 years ago, and the comic stores there are amazing. And I remember going into one, and they had like a huge collection of like Tintin just right there. Like basically what you're saying, like every beautiful collection, giant books, like all sorts of ways. And interestingly enough, they were right next to all the Milo Manera collection. So it's like,
I don't know who Milo is.
Oh, you don't know Milo Manera? He's like a kind of an erotic artist. You would call him an erotic artist for sure.
Oh,
he did
he's
like
the one
Click, Butterscotch. He did that cover.
Spider-Woman cover.
Yeah.
Yeah. That was a sick cover.
He's highly respected as like an artist, specifically for his paintings of nude women. So that was kind of a culture shock to me, going in there and being like, wow, here's all the Tintin right next to all the tits,
Yeah.
And it's like, that's where I think we should go. What I was talking about earlier.
All right, here we go. Number 4.
There was quite a few European artists that I'd love to see English editions from. Prichard, Gottlieb, Alexis, Zanzim, Blachon, Soleil. So I just wanted to pick one for this list, so it wouldn't be all European artists.
Yeah, those names mean nothing to me.
Okay, well, the one I went with, he's a Swedish artist, Hans Arnold, and I actually have some examples of his work here to show you. So he died in 2010, 1920 to 2010. And, he just has this really like detailed style of drawing. It's very charming.
That's beautiful.
Great scale. Like everything about it is beautiful. They're beautiful drawings, but they're also fun. They have this kind of macabre component to them. And he did a tarot deck. This isn't from a tarot deck. This is ABBA. And, he's kind of cheeky. This is from The Hobbit.
Yeah.
So I have one book of his in English. I think this is the only one I found was Monsterland, which this book is great, but he's got a ton of work, especially his adult work.
I think I've seen that Monsterland. That looks familiar to me. Those images that you showed though, it's like
he looks a bit like Edward Gorey. He has a bit of that kind of vibe.
That's what I was gonna say, absolutely.
Yeah.
But it also the other thing is it's so quintessentially 70s. Like I feel like I've seen his style. Like he must have informed a lot of other artists, right? I mean,
well, I think a lot of his stuff is floating around. Like I think he was doing illustration in the Western market as well, or like his illustrations were sort of like seeping into it. Or maybe there's a bunch of other American artists that look like his. But he's someone who I've always been kind of fascinated with his work whenever I've seen it. And there's so little of it. So definitely like a big Hans Arnold collection.
That's super cool. Anyway, and before I share my next one, am I crazy when I look at his artwork to also make a link to Maurice Sendak?
No, I could see that as well. He has that kind of sensibility. I think that ties into that sort of 70s look.
Yeah.
There's something about it where it's kind of like a little psychedelic, but still a little like sort of 1950s illustration style is kind of still like under the surface a bit. And it's a little creepy, like even like something like Schoolhouse Rock or something like that. You can even see the kind of like line work kind of creeping in to like all of this stuff from that period.
That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that.
If you ever go to the website Monster Brains, the blog, phenomenal blog. It's been going for like, I think more than a decade. Great, huge scans of like monsters. You can find like big screens of them, make them your computer background.
Oh, dude, I'll do that.
Yeah. Go check it out. Monster Brains. It's a blog, so it won't last much longer.
All right. So for my number 4, this is also an artist from the 1970s. He has a lot of books floating around, but I don't know if it's exactly what I want. He is a pretty big departure from the art style of Mr. Arnold, but it is Ralph Steadman. I have this book, Ralph Steadman, America. And it's a collection. It's like a paperback. It's kind of an odd, it's almost like 11 by 17 turned sideways, but it's all the work that he did for Rolling Stone with Hunter S. Thompson. And I love it. It's not so much about him. It'll give like a brief synopsis about, what this art was appearing with as far as like writing, like what article in Rolling Stones it appeared beside. But I want that for a larger collection of his work.
Like his other work.
Yeah, and he has a lot of other work. Like he's most famously known for his work with Hunter S. Thompson, the imagery that he created for Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas in particular, I think is one that people really, really know. But he has a pretty wide breadth of work, and I think it would be cool if somebody made a large coffee table book, like showing all of his, not all of his work, but like that breadth of work. The one that I found seems more like biographical than what I'm looking for exactly. I don't own it, so maybe somebody will correct me, but that's what I want.
I feel like he's faded a bit from the cultural imagination. Because I know I've seen that book before. And so it probably came out in like the 90s or early 2000s, I would guess.
Which one? The
one that you're talking about. His America?
Oh, yeah, I think that may have been in the 90s. I don't know.
I don't think he's as recognized by like, younger generations and stuff. In fact, I'm in a Simpsons group on Facebook, and someone posted recently like the scene from The Simpsons where they're doing like a parody of like Dr. Gonzo and his lawyer in the car.
That sure was a fun trip to Las Vegas.
Too many kids.
And someone posting like, oh, I just found out this is from a movie. And then people are tuning in and be like, no, that's by Hunter S. Thompson. He drew that.
Yeah.
So he's not a household name anymore, I don't think, or at least not as much.
I've come across that too, where people seem to think that it was Hunter S. Thompson that did the illustrations. And it's really a shame, like, because Hunter S. Thompson is not an artist. He's an artist as a writer, but not, with pen and ink. And Ralph Steadman, I've always really liked his stuff because there was this sort of like, it's this wild movements, these marks that are just like seem chaotic, but there's a real level of talent there.
There's a lot of structure. Like I think of his stuff, I think of really clean lines, parallel lines, like, look like they're drawn with a ruler or whatever, very constructed. And then this sort of like sheen of messiness.
Yeah.
It doesn't betray the art because it's a big part of it, but I think it does like sort of give the impression that it's just kind of like a scribble or whatever, when clearly it's like a very worked drawing.
Yeah.
I don't even know how he's working. Were they lithographs or something? I don't know how he worked.
I don't know that much about it, but he sort of reminds me, or I guess like Frank Miller sometimes reminds me of Ralph Steadman, when Frank will kind of go wild and work just with blacks, and like some of his drawings are just sort of like not quite right, but it works because he has like an underlying knowledge about anatomy and what is that when you set up a scene, like a structure, composition. Yeah. Because he has that knowledge, like he can break those rules a little bit more. And that's the same with Ralph Steadman. It's like, why does this work? It looks like just splatters and scribbles on top of geometric patterns or like sharp lines.
But it has kind of a logic to it, like the way he structures his world. It's like it's expressive of, emotion, and the personality of the characters is sort of brought out in the way that he depicts them, rather than just like a straightforward depiction. It's gonzo art, really. Like it kind of fits in. Like it's about telling a good story and about like, being in the moment. But it's like, it's very, very disciplined at the same time. He's a very interesting artist.
Absolutely. All right. What number are we on? Number 3.
Complete Crumb, volume 18 and up. So I don't know if you're familiar with the Complete Crumb.
I am not.
Fantagraphics has put out this series. It's 17 volumes. I have them all right here. That basically tracks Robert Crumb's work from a teenager. So it's stuff he was doing in zines, like ripping off Mad Magazine, up until 1989. And then it stops. And it's most of everything. Like the Yum Yum book isn't in there because his first wife owns a copyright on that. So if you want to own the Complete Crumb, you have to own that separately. And there's a few things that, Fantagraphics missed. But it's very convenient in terms of collecting Crumb, but it stops there. So it misses like half of his work for Weirdo. It misses like 3 issues of Zap that came after. It misses all of Hup, all of Mystic Funnies. Genesis, of course, isn't there. I feel like Genesis you could leave out.
Yeah, that's like a standalone thing.
Yeah, I don't think it would work in that series. But and then since then he hasn't done as much in terms of comics, but he's done a bit. There's definitely some like dirty laundry stuff they did with his wife Aileen, who passed away a few months ago, and it just stops. And so the idea at the time, as the complete Crumb was being published, Crumb was doing Hup for Last Gasp, and the complete Crumb was being published by Fantagraphics. So the idea was you stop at Hup because you don't want to sort of undermine the sale of this other comic book. And then I think the sort of idea was that maybe pick up later on. But then the movie came out. Crumb became like even more famous. And now it's like Fantagraphics doesn't really put out Crumb books anymore. He gets put out by these like obscure French publishers doing like these high-end editions. And it just never got picked up. So it just stops and it misses like, you know, it needs at least 3 more volumes to have like what I call the canonical Crumb.
Yeah.
Which is the Big Yum Yum book, the complete Crumb, the Weirdo Years, Zap, Hup, Mystic Funnies, and a bit of Dirty Laundry. I say that in my Crumb videos. So it's missing a lot of that. And it would be nice if it was in one book.
Yeah.
And so that is definitely had to be on my list.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I have a question about like because he's like living in France now, right? Is that like a big part of it? Is just like, I mean, is it that Fantagraphics can't afford him, or is it just like he's just
I think there's a lot of factors. There's a lot of controversy around publishing Crumb, for one. So it's like I think a lot of American publishers don't want to touch him, maybe even Fantagraphics included. I don't know. But then I think it's also just like the money is like there. So it's like the most recent book I have it's like the complete comic covers that was put out by this, I think, a French company. And it's like a really expensive. It was $100, and it's like that's how he's publishing now. And he makes most of his money off of the sale of original art. So, I mean, I guess he just doesn't care enough to, like, publish it. It's not like he's directing his own publishing. He's just, like, making money and listening to records.
Yeah. All right.
But, yeah, that's definitely on my list. I just wish it continued because I have all these floppy comics. I don't really like having floppy comics. And I got to have a stack of them because it's the only way you can get it all together. And it's a pain in the ass.
I think, to be honest, you've got me turned around on floppy comics. Because I got so many boxes of comics and I'm like, shit, maybe I do need to just own books of these.
So for the listeners, Patrick and I, we kind of differ substantially as collectors in that I pretty much exclusively collect books and collections of things that I want to read. And I hate having to have like floppy like comics and boards and bags. They're so inconvenient. They're hard to get out when you want to look at them. They're hard to find when you want to look at them. Yes. And I just end up not looking at them and they just collect dust. And it's like I want like a living library of books that I can just pull up. But Patrick, he's got this sort of like fetish obsession with like the original thing, and he just wants to like get his greedy little fingers on it and have it so no one else can have it. And it's like some sort of creepy perversion that he has, basically.
It is, yeah. Well, and all of those things, all of those drawbacks you listed are 100% accurate. So much so that actually, I'm just going to shoehorn this in. One of mine that I wrote down was John Carter of Warlord of Mars, the Marvel series. I went out because I got obsessed with John Carter and bought all of the floppy issues from the 70s, including the annuals. Kind of fun. I think it's issue 28 or 18. I forget. Frank Miller makes his first appearance published in Marvel in John Carter, Warlord of Mars. But I wanted that in a collection because I want to read it again, but I don't want to pull out all the floppy issues.
Well, that's it. Like, you have to be so precious too. Like when you get into like older stuff, like, because I won't lie, there is a presence there. Like, you know, if there was like a nice copy of like whatever Mad number 8 or something in front of me, like it would be a joy to look through that. You know, I like there would definitely be a presence. I would have like total veneration for the object, but I don't know. I mean, I use my Mad archives like weekly. You know, like I pull it off my shelf and I look at it all the time. And that's just how I like my books. I like, if I have a momentary thought that I want to look at something, I want to be able to get it and look at it and, you know.
There's no real defense of having floppies. It's all emotional. It's all, that's the
Well,
only
I think
way.
I'm probably deluding myself too, because there's a lot of emotional attachment for me too, but you know, it's to the work and seeing the work.
Yeah.
I don't know, just something about books. I go for books. Anyway, I don't
All
mean
right.
to make fun of you over it.
No,
Like,
I don't
I
mind
get
at all.
like the idea of having the original thing and like how neat that is, but I just don't have room for it.
All right, so my number 3 is my favorite Mad cover artist. I think most people's favorite Mad cover artist, no offense to any of the
Sam
others.
Viviano.
Norman Mingo. Norman Mingo was like the second regular contributor for covers. Kelly Freas was, well, okay, if you go back to the comics, Harvey Kurtzman, then Kelly Freas took over shortly after it became a magazine. And then Norman Mingo was like the guy for, it seems like, decades. And I thought it would be really cool to have an artist edition of Mad covers. So you track down all of that original artwork, you go do high quality scans, and you compile a book so you can see it as the artist created it, you know, leaving, you know, the space for the Mad logo or for whatever other things need to be added, but you just get his beautiful paintings untouched on your table.
I mean, that would be a beautiful thing. I don't know if Mingo's my favorite. I don't think of Mingo very often because I
I'm
feel
sorry,
like
Kyle. What I just said it's everybody's favorite. So, like
well, you said
gotta-
accepting Harvey Kurtzman, who, you know, basically that should be the caveat before anything you say about that. It's like, well, obviously Kurtzman's at the top, but I don't know. I always like, obviously his artwork's gorgeous, but I feel like he's kind of like he was like an idiot savant, right? Because he's like this guy who, he wasn't like a comedy guy.
No.
He was an illustration guy. He was like Norman Rockwell type illustration guy.
Yeah. Tons of ads with these like beautiful women like wearing dresses or like, I don't know, putting on pantyhose or something. I was looking through it when I was doing research for this. He's such a beautiful painter. It's unreal.
He's phenomenal. He's phenomenal. But he had good comedic chops, right? Like a lot of his covers are really funny. I can't think of which ones it would be specifically, other than like the only one that like,
number 90
immediately. What's number 90?
Fink's Donuts. That's my favorite cover.
I prefer the cracked square version of that. No, Fink's Donuts. That's a good one. That is a good one. Yeah, and you know he probably did most of the ones where it's like a really nice looking Alfred. But I don't know. I mean, I always look forward to the weird ones, you know, like whenever Sergio would do a cover, or like I think Caldwell did a cover at one point.
Yeah, he did it. Well, he did the 9/11 cover.
Oh, did he do that one?
Yeah, they pulled it because it was right after 9/11 and there was a dead man on the street of New York City.
But he did before 9/11. Yeah. Yeah, he wasn't like, well, here's our 9/11 memorial. Okay, so here's my question about your book. Would there just be Mad covers, or would it be his other work as well?
Originally, I was thinking just his Mad covers, but it would be cool to, I mean, I don't really know that much about him. So like have a couple pages, a little biography, some of his other work before he got into Mad, I think would be cool. It would be able to like a comparative, you know, look.
Well, let's expand your idea here. And let's say a series of Norman Mingo coffee table books, collecting his work and celebrating his life. Because that certainly doesn't exist. Like, I feel like he's like outside of Mad circles. I couldn't imagine like very many people know who he is.
No. It's like, it would be like saying the name Norman Saunders to somebody. Unless you care about Mars Attacks, you're not going to know who that is.
Yeah, I didn't know who that was. And I like Mars Attacks.
He's the guy who painted all the Mars Attacks. He was this pulp artist from Minnesota. And, you know, it's like nobody knows who he is, but he had like this huge cultural impact because of his work on Mars Attacks.
I have a few good illustrator books like that. What's the one? It's called, what's it called? Sex and...
Of course that has to do with sex.
Sex and Horror.
Have you talked to a doctor?
It's Italian illustrators that are doing like these sort of like giallo posters and like horror artwork covers for magazines, pulp magazines and books.
Yeah.
And I just eat that stuff up. Any kind of pulp illustration, I just eat that up. I love it. So yeah, I would love to see that.
Number 2.
All right, so inspired by Crumb's Genesis. This isn't a Crumb suggestion, but this is continuing on Crumb's work. I want to see the rest of the Bible illustrated by prestige artists who you wouldn't expect to do it, who draws it straightforward as like an illustration project, just draws what's in the text. If you've read Crumb's Genesis, you know what I mean. It's like there's not a lot of editorializing by the artist. So, it could be Sergio Aragonés, it could be Charles Burns, Dan Klaus, Jim Woodring, Robert Williams, anyone. Think of like, the biggest artists that you can, but like who you would not expect to do the Bible, right? Like it has to be someone who's like, isn't an obvious choice. Maybe you could even get crazy, get like Junji Ito doing like Revelations or something, like that horror artist that you see around doing manga or something, like money is no object. And you go, everyone gets a book and you have like 5 years to make it. Here's like however much it costs us to get you to spend 5 years making this thing. Or you could do it like break it up into chapters and say, because Crumb did all of Genesis, but you could do like up to like the end of the Garden of Eden and then switch to another artist or something. Because there's kind of story arcs within the Bible. Yeah.
Well, there's like the narrative ones. And then there's like, would you include things like Deuteronomy? Like where it's
nothing
just
left out. There could be nothing left out.
Nothing left out. So you're doing so okay, but I mean like some of that stuff is like just rules.
We know he'd be good for that chapter. Robert Sikoriak would be awesome for that chapter. He did a book that was the terms and conditions of, I think, iTunes.
Okay.
He did like a whole comic of that. He did a comic of the U.S. Constitution. I actually got to draw with him at a comics jam when I was like 18. He's a really interesting artist because he's a copier. And even there, when he was at the jam, he would like open up like a comic that had like Batman, and he would draw it like pretty much exactly like it. And his main thing was in Raw magazine, retold classic literature using different comic characters. So he did Genesis using Blondie and Dagwood. He did... my personal favorite was Dante's Inferno with Bazooka Joe comics. And they're great. It tells the whole kind of story, but it uses the tropes and that exact style. And he's like an amazing copier. He used to work for SpongeBob comics. I used to read those when I worked at the newsstand. Yeah. Awesome artist. He would be perfect for something like that.
All right. I mean, I love the idea. I really
Have you read Crumb's Genesis?
Yeah, I own it.
Yeah, so I mean, he's got the section where it's all begats and stuff. So, he makes it interesting.
Yeah, that is true. Yeah, I love whenever I see any comic version of the Bible, I'll purchase it. I mean, if it's by somebody who not like they sell this one at Hobby Lobby where it's like it's just shit. Yeah, you know what I'm talking about. It's just like a trashy comic of the Bible, and it's not.
Yeah, that's just meant to like sell to like Christian grandmas who will buy anything Christian for their kids or for their grandkids or whatever. It's just schlock, but not like the good kind of schlock from like the 50s or something.
But like Kubert's Bible stories, there's like a thing where it's like a Time Life magazine size comic that DC put out of Bible stories. It's sick, dude. Yeah.
So I don't know what chapter Noah Van Sciver would get, but I think he'd have to get one.
Oh, what would he be good at?
I don't know. Let's give him Deuteronomy. He can.
No, I'm giving him Second Maccabees. That's what I'm going to give him.
No, he'd be good at like something with Jesus. I think he'd be good. He'd be a really good New Testament kind of guy. One of the early sort of stories of Christ, where it's not a lot of magic in it, he can basically give it the Mormon treatment. Even better because they would pay him a lot more.
Yeah. All right. What is my number 2? A collection of a recurring Mad magazine character, and that is Monroe by Tony Barbietti. I probably fucked up his name. And illustrated by Bill Ray, or William Ray as he goes by now. A complete collection of Monroe. So that does include things that were not drawn by Bill. He leaves Mad Magazine and somebody else picks it up. But I do think...
Oh, really? I didn't know that. Monroe continued after he left.
Yes. And it was not as good visually, but I think the person did a fine job. It didn't really work as well for me.
Johnny Sampson, he could pull it off, I think, maybe.
No, what? A Monroe?
It would look different, though. It would have to look
No,
totally
Johnny
different.
Sampson could do something like Spy versus Spy. He can't do Monroe. I'm sorry.
He could do Monroe.
I have the utmost respect for him, but I have to vociferously disagree.
All right. Well, Johnny Sampson, when you come on the show, this other goon won't be here. Just you and me, and I'll put you up on a pedestal.
All right. Well, I'd like to hear his thoughts on it.
There we go. Or we can bring him on and do a good cop, bad cop kind of thing.
Yeah. So one of the reasons I want to get back to Monroe real quick, because it's one of like the few things in Mad that had like an ongoing narrative. Like they had some stories that were like 2-part stories that were very much connected between issues. But even so, like this family, things happened in an issue, like the parents got divorced. And then, a couple of issues later, you see the dad living in some slum.
Yeah.
It was really unique. And I think that they've tried to capture that again later on. But I don't think they were ever able to do that successfully.
Well, I would 100% buy that book. And I'd love to see more Monroe by Ray. I remember Monroe was sort of coming into Mad as I was kind of leaving Mad in the late 90s.
Yeah.
And so I really enjoyed it, but I didn't really see where the story went. I hear from you sort of, how the story sort of evolved. And, it really intrigues me. I'd love to see a Monroe collection. That would be great.
Well, the other thing, too, your ears will perk up about this. Like, there's like a very sexual part of it, too.
That was definitely a factor that I liked about it. It was a little more lurid in the way that it sort of dealt with like, white trash.
Yeah. And also like puberty for a young man. Like he was just this obsessed. And I don't know, I think that was captured really well in the writing and also in the artwork, like what it feels like to be in the mind of an adolescent.
And it's the right demographic too for Mad too, right? Because it's a lot of kids like kind of on the verge of that, and adults can relate to it because they went through it. Good stuff.
Yeah, thank you. Runners up.
All right, so for me, the complete Goodman Beaver collection featuring Goodman Beaver Goes to Playboy Mansion, which you have. I sent you Executive Comic Book.
You did, yeah.
Which I kind of regret a little bit. I have another version of it, but then when I looked at it, I was like, oh, this isn't quite as good. But they got sued. So I believe it ran in Help. I don't know the history really well, but I think it ran in Help. And then I think there was like a cease and desist or something from Archie Comics.
Oh.
And so then it wasn't reprinted again in in the collections, right? Like, so it was in Executive Comic Book, it was in Help. And then I think it might have appeared in like a comics journal. I think they reprinted it. But otherwise, it's not in the collection. Like I have the Goodman Beaver collection, which is great. This is like a Will Elder, Harvey Kurtzman cartoon. But the Playboy comic's missing. And another one, this one isn't a book or anything, but I guess it's a publication, a poster. I'd like to see a really nice, high-quality version of Boris Vallejo's back cover of Mad Magazine, Mad Cuts the Bologna. Do you know this one?
Yeah.
It's a barbarian, he's cutting the bologna. Oh, I love that. I want like a big poster of that on my wall. You can't get it.
Yeah, that'd be sick. All right, so I think I actually mentioned a bunch of my runners up, but a Mars Attacks coffee table book. Turns out they do make it, but I'm gonna buy it. John Pound put it together. My only worry is I like those books that are like obscenely big. I have a book stand that is perfect for books like that. Like I have like a thing of like the complete works of Shakespeare, and I can put it on there, and it's huge, but I can read it, and it's wonderful. And I want that for the Mars Attacks cards because I'm trying to collect them all. But
how big do you think those paintings are? Have you seen like an original? Like how big are the?
I've never seen an original. I sort of envisioned this as being sort of like copies, high resolution photographs of the cards themselves, so that it kind of captures that part of it. I didn't think about an artist edition. I guess I assumed that none of the art exists anymore.
I don't know. I mean, it's almost certainly not in one place. That would be the hard part. You'd have to track it down.
Yeah.
But it would be nice to see even like a card book where it was like a mix of things where you found the original art. Because there's Garbage Pail Kids, there's Dinosaurs Attacks, there's Mars Attacks.
Yeah.
Other crazy ones, Wacky Packages,
Yeah. Well, John Pound, the guy who worked, he did Garbage Pail Kids. He compiled this book. I think he did a little write-up for each card. So I got that in my Amazon card. I'm about to buy it, I think.
Nice. Is it cheap?
It's like $28. That's why I don't think it's what I want. I don't think it's what I want because of that price. Yeah. So, yeah.
Well, if it makes you feel better if it was in Canada, there'd probably be like $40 of shipping.
Hey, that does make me feel better. Thank you. Number 1.
Locate Little Cozy Nostril at the End of the World. This is my dream book that I'd love to make. Basically a Where's Waldo book, but for my flagship character who I don't do anything with other than like a branding logo, Little Cozy Nostril. It wouldn't be for kids, it would be like mature. And it would be just like a Waldo book, the full-size thing.
Wimmelbilder.
A Wimmelbilder bush. That's what it would be. That's what you're looking at me like. The bush means book. So when you say Wimmelbilder, that means a busy picture. And Wimmelbilder bush. It might be
I thought
bush.
that was like some Freudian slip.
I think it could be a Freudian mispronunciation, but I think it's bush. It's B-U, I think S-C-H. Or it might be S. I can't remember how it's spelled, but yeah.
Okay.
There's Wimmelbilder and Wimmelbilder bush or butch.
Yeah.
I'm not German. It's just we don't have a word for that. But yeah, a busy picture book, Little Cozy Nostril. This is what I've wanted to draw since I was, 9 years old and creating this character. And I think it would be at the end of the world. So it's like every page would be like a different end of the world. So, zombies, 2012, Y2K, comet, aliens, whatever I can think of, but like it's the kind of thing, it takes Martin Handford a full month to do a Waldo page. And I bet that's gone up because his work's become more dense as he's gotten older.
Yeah.
So, probably like a month to 2 months to do a page. So it's like, you need to have all the money up front, basically. Like you need to be able to like take 2 years off to make this book, or at least a year. And on top of that, then you have to get it published, So that's my dream book. So that had to be number one for me.
Dude, I love that. I love that you picked something for yourself.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Oh, that's perfect. Would you hide like little personal references? Like
I mean, probably, like I'd put
Yeah.
my wife in it or something, like and she's actually on the beer I'm drinking right now. I don't know if you can see it on here, but like I did put her in there reading a book.
Oh, nice, dude. Yeah.
But, sparingly, I mean, you got a lot of room. It's like you can slip some things in. But mostly, I wouldn't want to waste the space on things that people wouldn't get, like every moment in one of those drawings is like a moment to like entertain. And that's what Martin Handford does. And that's why he's like such a phenomenon. And that's why the Waldo books are so good.
Yeah.
Is that anywhere you look, it's interesting. It's never just like people standing around doing nothing. It's like people, there's action going on. If there's people standing around doing nothing, it's because it's transitioning into something that's happening, and something's going to happen to them in a minute.
Yeah, they'll be like standing in line, and then either before or after them is some level of chaos that's
going to reach them.
Yeah.
So when you look at it, you're like, you can build these narratives about what's happening, and like I loved them so much as a kid, and I've always wanted to do one, but it's like. It's the only thing I really love to draw. It's like my favorite thing to draw is just a busy fucking picture. Like fit as much in there as you can. But it's like, who will pay you to do that? Nobody.
Yeah.
Like no one wants to pay 400 hours of work or something.
Not when we have Martin Handford.
No, well, and I mean, he doesn't do much of it either, really. Like Waldo kind of like trailed off. It exploded and it had all this marketing. Like there's a cartoon show and all this like kind of embarrassing marketing, and then it kind of like there's still Waldo books, but they're not. I don't feel like they're quite the same as like the first like 3. I think those were like the big ones. There was Where's Waldo Now, and I think it's The Great Waldo Search.
Well, even Waldo in Hollywood. I thought
that one's good too. It's 4 books.
Yeah,
it's 4 books.
Yeah. All right, my number one is Mad Magazine. Back.
Nice.
To what it was.
Nice.
This is what I imagine, though. It's like, all new material. That's actually false. I think that Mad Magazine did something kind of cool in having the Mad Vault. And every once in a while, they would have in the pages, throw something in from way back when. And I always appreciated that because it was like, for me, it's like, this is new.
Well, presumably, if Mad Magazine was back, you would also have super specials back and stuff like that. So
that's right. I didn't.
That's where you can have that reissued material,
Yeah.
And that's what like really connects the generations of Mad readers, are those super specials. It makes it so that like if you're a 10-year-old reading Mad, you can talk to like, your grandpa who read Mad, and like you can relate,
Yeah.
because there's like some through lines there.
Boy, they're really socking it to that Spiro Agnew guy again. He must work there or something.
Yeah, they're like, hey, look at this. It's called Starchy. I know Archie. Do you know Starchy, Granddad? He'd be like, yeah, I remember.
I don't remember anything that happened in the last 2 weeks, but I remember Starchy. Everything about Starchy.
Yeah.
So would Susie be at the helm?
Yeah.
Yeah, she's earned her place, I think, for sure.
Yeah.
Like, I think you turn it around. You gotta keep Susie until she wants to leave.
You keep Susie. You get
But big staff. The rest is staff.
You
bring
take me
everybody,
on as
people.
assistant art director.
There you go. Well, that might be
Assistant to the art director.
There you go. Maybe.
Oh, I would love to be able to make a decision for once in my life.
Well, that's beautiful, man.
That was beautiful. Hey, let's move on to that next department. Here we are. We're at the Tips for Twits department.
All right. You got any good tips for twits today, Patrick?
I do. I have. Listen, I went with, in the first episode, something that is not recent, something that I am not on the latest fad. And so I decided to double down on that. And I'm going to suggest a book.
Take a look. It's in a book, a reading rainbow.
A novel from 1946 called Mr. Roberts. You might know this. This book was made into a Broadway play. This book was then made into a Hollywood film. The Hollywood film, who did it have in it? It had James Cagney, Henry Fonda, William Powell, and Jack Lemmon. This is the second time I've read this book, and this book captures...
When was the first time you read it?
First time I read it? I was probably in my early 20s.
So you were out and about.
Yeah. I think I was just out of the Navy when I read it.
Okay.
But this is the thing. It's a comedic novel. It's a series of stories that are like connected, not as like an overarching narrative, just as like these little vignettes of things that happen on the USS Reluctant, which is a supply ship. And for anybody that's been in the military in a non-combat role, this book captures life aboard a ship like nothing I've ever read. It's just amazing. It's silly. It's funny. They're just constantly fucking around and fucking with each other. And it's great. There's sort of a tragic story behind it. Thomas Hagen ended up supposed that he killed himself. He was sort of overcome with the fame that this novel brought him, and he killed himself. But it's one of the funniest stories I have ever read, and it's not often that I laugh out loud when I'm reading a book with words in it.
Yeah, so reflexively I was uninterested because it was a book. Just kidding. I do like books as well. You actually did kind of interest me when you said that it really like gets across what it's like to be on a boat, and sort of like that in a very specific like career capacity. Because I remember reading Down and Out in Paris and London. Mm-hmm. And feeling the same way in the way that it talks about like working in a kitchen there. And I remember like I was really interested in that. So when you say that, it kind of like, it makes me think like, oh, I wonder if I could recapture that enjoyment I had of reading that and kind of feeling like I was immersed in that environment.
Yeah. It's one of those things that because I had experience in something very similar, I have a hard time recommending the book because I'm never certain if it's something that can transfer to somebody who didn't experience it. However, I mean, they did make a fucking Broadway musical and a movie out of it. So there has to be something in it that can be appreciated if you have not experienced it yourself.
Well, I think people like things that they don't experience. So like here, I'm in Nova Scotia in the Maritimes of Canada. Yeah. And we get a lot of Japanese tourists who are really into Anne of Green Gables, because for them that's like a very foreign experience. So especially on Prince Edward Island, but even here, like there's a real like romance for this area of the world in Japan.
Wow, very cool. Hey, what's your tip?
Well, wait, I want to know how many liters of chicken fat you're going to give this.
How many liters? I go by the imperial system, so I'll go by quarts.
Oh, you're going quarts. Okay, I'll do the math later.
For me, this is 4.5 quarts.
Out of 5 quarts.
Out of 5 quarts.
That's all you need to know. It's out of 5. So
yeah.
4.5.
Yeah.
That's a strong recommendation.
Heck yeah.
Well, I have a strong recommendation too. So I talked earlier about how, when I was a kid, I used to rent R-rated movies and I saw all the horror movies in my town. Well, a lot of those horror movies I have really fond memories of, but you go back and watch them and maybe they're not as good as you remember. But I recently rewatched this one. And it blew my mind how good it was, to the point where it's like I didn't appreciate it enough when I saw it when I was 12. And that movie is Basket Case from 1982.
I've never heard of this.
I actually have some pictures, so you don't even need to look it up. Here's the poster.
Ooh.
So it's about this hokey country boy, and he shows up at this hotel on 42nd Street in New York City, you know, where it's like all the grindhouse film theaters are. There's just crime and prostitution, and he's got this big basket. And he checks into like a seedy motel. He flashes his big wad of cash, and then he leaves without the basket. But he's staying in the motel. So there's like all this sort of speculation about what's in the basket.
What's in the basket? My brother.
What's in the basket?
Open it, if you dare. Basket case.
We quickly find out that in the basket is his formerly conjoined twin, Belial, who was growing out of his side when he was a kid, and they have like a psychic link. But when he was a teenager, they removed Belial, and they were basically, his parents were like, throw him in the garbage, it doesn't matter. I don't know if they had an accent like that, but they were really like shitty to Belial. They didn't consider him human. They're like, oh, is it human? So it's Dwayne and Belial Bradley. Dwayne, the brother, who's like ostensibly normal. He knows that Belial is like a person.
Yeah.
He's got like this rich inner life. But so first of all, they're in New York to get revenge on the doctors who separated them. They're murdering them, basically. He tracks them down, and then Belial kills them. But while he's in the city...
Have you considered the fact that you're recommending a movie and then like spoiling plot points?
Oh, well, I mean, spoilers. I'm not going to say the end. This is the basic plot that you would find out in the first 10 minutes of the film. So, but what happens is, as they're apart, Dwayne starts being able to cope and live normally, while Belial is wreaking havoc in the hotel. And there's this great symbolic duality between the characters, where Belial is like the id of Dwayne, and so Dwayne is this like kind of good guy who's going around, and he can, he's kind of good looking, he can get with the women, he's kind of innocent and nice and friendly. And then Belial is just his sexual impulses, his anger, all of this is definitely not for children. And there is nudity and graphic violence. And I think the thing that makes this really interesting is that it's the whole thing is done on a shoestring budget. The director, Frank Henenlotter, I probably pronounced that wrong, he basically put in his life savings of $15,000, and it shows. And I think they raised some more money as they went. And I think the whole movie was probably $20,000 to $30,000. It's very cheaply made, and the acting is really stilted, and all the actors, they didn't go on to anything else unless it was more of his films, which he did a few after. The effects are all really hokey, but it has this real dreamlike quality that just really works in a way that there's dozens of other films that are the same kind of story behind it that don't work in the same way that this one does. It has comedic elements, but I wouldn't call it a horror comedy. It still plays off as a horror.
Yeah.
And there's 2 sequels that are not as good, but you check them out anyway. So the effects get a lot better. And there's all these other weird freak characters in the other ones. But the first one is just, the whole thing comes together. It's almost poetic in a sense. And I just love it. Overall, I give it 4 liters of chicken fat out of 5 liters, which, as everyone knows, is a half deciliter. Strong recommendation from me for Basket Case from 1982.
Excellent. Hey, let's move on to that next department. Hey, and welcome to the Letter Rip Department.
Yes, that's right. This is where we read letters from listeners, and then also just letters.
Yeah, and you can send us a letter. Podrzebiepodcast @gmail.com. Subject line, idiot mail.
And please address your letter, Dear Idiots. Or, hey idiots, or you idiots, or you are a bunch of idiots, whatever.
Hey, dum-dum.
Well, not dum-dum. That's insulting. I find that insulting. But, I don't want our dum-dum listeners calling us dum-dums.
Oh, yeah, good point. They're the dum-dums. We're the idiots.
Exactly.
All
But,
right.
they're kind of idiots, too, for listening to this. I mean that from the heart.
Well, certainly. Hey, let's bring up that first letter. First letter, this comes from Viz Humor Magazine. As I was walking to the shops the other day with my 5-year-old daughter, a lorry driver beeped his horn at me and shouted, "For Look at the tits on that. It was a sunny day, and I was wearing a short skirt at the time. With so many miserable faces in the world these days, wouldn't it be nice if a few more people were as friendly as this a little more often? Miss B. Idiot from Stoke-on-Trent. What do you think, Kyle? Do you think people are more friendly these days?
Yeah, I mean, it's true. Like, everyone's walking around. We're all afraid of our neighbors. No one wants to just kind of get together at the sock hop or the ice cream social and just, kind of sexually harass each other. And, I think that is symbolic of a better time in our past, the golden era of
catcalling.
Yeah. Podrzebie podcast does not endorse catcalling women. All right, next letter.
All right, this one again comes from Viz magazine. The letterbox, that's what they called this. They say no news is good news. Well, my grandfather went on a 2-week camping holiday in Zambia in 1952 and hasn't been seen since. So I hardly think the saying applies in this case. C. Westman from Hollywood. Do you think people are too optimistic, Kyle?
Oh, absolutely. I hate optimism. I hate sincerity. Like, when people are optimistic or sincere around me, I get very skeptical. Because, like, what are you trying to hide?
I noticed that.
Yeah, I like a nice veneer of irony. At least I know where people stand then, This letter kind of reminds me of that great play, Death of the Salesman. He had the uncle that went into the jungle and then came out a millionaire. And, maybe he'll come out one day. So, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I think in this case, no news is still no news. So we'll wait and see, I guess.
Certainly isn't bad news.
Although it could be like that Cannibal Holocaust movie. That didn't turn out so well either. So it's neutral. I'd say it's neutral.
Neutral. News is news.
All right, and that's enough news, I think, for today. So let's move on to our next department.
Hello, and welcome to the begging and groveling department.
That's right, folks. This is where we really kind of lean on you to stroke our egos and help us out. Because, we wouldn't be doing this podcast if we were comfortable in our own bodies.
Listen to your old pals, Kyle and Paddy, all right? We don't ask for much, all right? You can just check out our stuff. How about that?
And, we do it in one department. So unlike other podcasts where they're trying to hit you up all the way through, we save it to the end and then we really lay it on thick.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So where can they find you, Kyle?
Me? Well, you can find me at my website at kylebridget.com, and everywhere else I'm at Little Cozy Nostril, including on YouTube, where I'm at Little Cozy Nostril, and I stream every Sunday from 7 p.m. to 9 p.m. Central Time in the Nostril Zone, where we listen to tunes and draw cartoons. As well, I have a series called Canonically Crumb on there, where I explore the comics and characters of R. Crumb's Crummyverse.
Very good. You can find me at flippinthrough.com. That has all my relevant links, but the most relevant is youtube.com/@flippinthrough. I think I got that one right. Who knows, though? Just look it up on the search engine. You'll find it.
And I'm not going to take too long to say this because you can't see it, but I'm on my knees. Not because I'm begging, but because I can't afford
His
chairs.
pants fell down.
we really want you to review on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. Put in however many, whatever their scale of chicken fat is, do the whole thing, and leave a comment and a review or whatever they call it. That really helps. And if you're watching this on YouTube, like and subscribe. Leave a comment. All right, well, that's enough of this. I got my pride.
Thank you so much for watching. I'm Paddy.
Thanks, I'm Kyle. We'll see you in 2 weeks. By the way, Ed, how's your mom?
I'm sorry. Did you just... That's a funny joke I just made. Just 24 issues of only Tintin in the Congo.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, anyway.